David, welcome to the Beginner's Mind Show. And I'm impressed by your career. You touch nearly every single stage in modern biotech, from patient access, market access, to clinical development, to preclinical development and early stage research. It includes Amgen, Alexion, and now your newest company, Sarcomatrix. But let's begin at the center of it all and start with the question, what problem is your company solving currently, and why do you think now is the right time?
Well, Krishna, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your show. I think it's a fabulous podcast and it's an honor to be here. Sarcomatrix is focused on muscle wasting diseases. And the way I think about it is, our body has muscle homeostasis, or the natural ability to regenerate muscle. And, we intuitively know that after we exercise, but it turns out that every day there's millions of muscle fibers that are microtorn every day, and they need to be repaired. And muscle wasting is when there's an imbalance between the ability to build muscle and then rebuild that muscle, or atrophy and hypertrophy. So I think the differences that we're going to make longer term is near term will definitely impact the muscular dystrophy space, not only Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but beyond all 30 different types of muscular dystrophy. And then I think as we think about longevity going further, now that we're managing our weight better and there's a lot of interest around longevity, age-related sarcopenia is starting to hit an awareness to the point where I think clinical studies are important. And I think eventually we could end up helping there too. So I see it a broad spectrum from ultra rare diseases all the way to a problem that many of us will address when we age into our 70s and 80s and beyond.
That's good. That's good to hear. Before we dive deeper into your company and what you are building, let's answer one of the most important questions for early listeners on this live stream. Why should they stay more than 5 minutes? What are the three core takeaways about your mission that they will miss when they just drop off now?
Okay, great question. Um, we're addressing a real unmet need in muscular dystrophy, and we potentially can help these individuals live longer. Right now, their average lifespan is about 29 years, and most of that is spent in a wheelchair with ventilation support. And the issue is not being supporting cardiac muscle and the leading cause of death for these individuals. And then secondly, we're all ready to go in our first in human clinical trials. Unfortunately, it's a very challenging funding environment, especially with first-in-class drugs. But with that funding, we could move immediately and possibly have a drug on the market within 3.5 years. And then finally, let's not forget, I understand it's hard to invest right now, but every day these individuals lose muscle mass and are dying earlier than they should. So we're really looking for the VC that is looking beyond not just the excellent opportunity for return on investment, but one that really understands muscle wasting diseases and is in it with the long term for us right now. So those three things are really important to us, and with your help, we could make a huge difference.
Yeah, investing is a little bit challenging these days. I fully understand that. Um, let's talk about your defining moment with Sarcometrics. You have an amazing career behind you and had a lot of great roles in great companies. When was the moment where you knew it's worth starting the next story?
Well, it was a bit of it was a catalyst in that at Portola, after we had launched Indexa into the market, it was acquired by Alexion, and then Alexion was acquired by AstraZeneca. And I was the individual that did the asset transfer over that year and a half
Mm.
period. And AstraZeneca did offer me a job in their strategy group, but I live in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. This is where my family is, and I'm very established here. So I took the exit package, and then I thought, well, why don't I at least see what's going on at the local university, University of Nevada, Reno? And I was really surprised to see there is two absolutely world-class muscular dystrophy labs there. The Peter Jones lab is focused on FSHD, a type of muscular dystrophy. And the Birkin lab has been spent the last 25 years focused on integrins and laminins that are key components of muscle. And their focus was Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Now, I happen to have family members that have muscular dystrophy. It's a congenital muscular dystrophy. And it just seems to me like everything lined up. It's an opportunity for me to license a drug. It's an opportunity for me to step up and be the CEO that I always wanted to be. But I think most importantly, it's an opportunity to help not only my family, but the greater community that's living with muscular dystrophies right now.
No, that's sorry to hear that your family is suffering from this disease.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I think that's a fair statement. So,
Yeah. You have been in biotech since the Amgen days, which is, I
yeah.
think, 2002-ish, 2000-ish. Is there still something in the industry that surprises you?
Yeah, actually, I started with Amgen in 1989, if I'm not
19.
mistaken, right out
Okay.
of pharmacy school. I knew in pharmacy school when I was getting my degree that I wanted to work in biotechnology, and it just so happened that Amgen was hiring some of their first sales reps. So I was one of their first sales reps they hired. And then because the company grew and we had to build so many things, it was a great opportunity for me to move into the home office and do just a variety of things from sales training to market access to at one point I was designing computer systems throughout the whole company, which I was not qualified for in any way, shape, or form, but I did it anyway, and in sales and marketing, et cetera. So that started really well. Um, the things that have changed since then, was that the question?
What surprises you still? I mean, I'm still
Oh,
amazed with 1989. It was, I think, back then it was Genentech at the end of the 70s, and Amgen
yeah.
started right after. Relatively from 2025 speaking, and you were one of the first people working in this new industry, basically.
I was the 116th employee at Amgen, and
Wow.
our leader, George Rathman, had just pivoted from, in the early days, they tried everything. They were looking at a low-fat porcine or hog
Mhm.
for human consumption at one point. But what's really interesting about that, I think, is that the lab there, Fu Quinn Lin was the leader of the lab that was looking for the epigen gene. And they had told him, listen, you've been looking for it for several years now. You've wasted enough resources. We're going to ask you to work on another program. And he said, listen, is it okay if my lab works from, 5 o'clock in the evening until 2 in the morning on our own time? And they did that. And about 6 weeks later, they isolated the gene. And when you look back at the history of the development of Amgen, um, and there was lawsuits involved because at that time Genetics Institute was also looking for that, and they looked at the lab notebooks, and it was first to discover at that time, and they beat Genetics Institutes by 2 weeks discovering that gene. So I look back at it, and it was just a fabulous time to be involved with biotechnology as it was emerging, and just all the problems that we had to solve as we went forward were just incredibly challenging and very, very engaging.
That's amazing. You experienced basically the end of the 80s, the 90s, the tremendous amount of VC investments happening in that time, the crisis in 2000, the crisis in 2008 in the industry, then California basically taking off in the 2010s, also
Yeah.
with the biotech industry, the Corona pandemic with the surge in uptake in valuations and public funding, and now we're in 2025. And my question to you is there still something in the industry that surprises you today, or have you seen everything?
Well, I think what surprises me today is, I mean, clearly the just explosion in advancements in science, and frankly, how challenging it is to understand all the different areas. It's almost like there's so much knowledge out there that we have to take a little sliver of it and really go deep into that area and focus. So that's a bit surprising how much there really is. And I actually, when I look back at it, and I've been at seven biotechs now, and
Mm.
I was at Gilead when they were about 100 people. So I've gone in when they're very, very early and then helped them build their commercial teams, scale, and then after about 5 or 6 years, then I move on. I was kind of like a mercenary, if you will. I go in and fight the fight, and then they pay me, and then I leave. But that being said, it's a lot of the same problems over and over again. I know you would think that in 3.5 decades of employment at 7 different biotech companies, that it would be radically different, but it tends to be the same problems, the same data sets, the same reimbursement issues, the same strategy. Um, I think social media is changing things dramatically right now,
Yeah.
but from a basic sales and marketing strategy, scaling perspective, a lot of the same issues.
Yeah, I totally agree. I had Christoph Langer on my podcast. It was 3 years ago in 2021. Back then he was partner at Third Rock Ventures. Then he
Mhm.
started Curie Bio in Boston, which I think the last number I heard was he raised $1.2 billion to deploy
Mhm.
into early stage investments. And he's Austrian, and he was at the speech in Vienna and
Yeah.
brought this example. He said, forget this, 9 out of 10 startup companies fail in biotech. 1 out of 10,000 ideas makes it to the market.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow. Interesting.
early stage ideas, and he just broke it down and said even in clinical development, it's 1 out of 100. So it's really staked against you. And many drug developers won't experience the feeling that one of their molecules hit the market.
Oh, yeah.
And my question to you is, when you hear these statistics and that basically the odds are staked against the drug developers, against success. Um, what's your opinion? Why does the work of your team, why does the work generally of drug developers in that environment matter to the world?
Well, first of all, I look back at it now that you characterize things that way. I've been incredibly lucky in having been involved with 3 different first-in-class drugs, whether it
Wow.
is erythropoietin, Epogen, Neupogen at Amgen. And then I was at Gilead when we were bringing the nucleotide analogs to the market first in class. And then most recently, the sequestering agent Indexa that would reverse the new factor 10A inhibitors at Portola. So, wow, I didn't I didn't realize the odds were stacked against me and that I was that incredibly lucky. So I feel fortunate there. And I'm really bad at remembering the question. What was the question again?
Why I think the odds Christopher Langer presents that 1 out of 10,000 molecules makes it to the market and still in clinics, 1 out of 100
Yeah.
is the success rate. Basically, it's 1%. When you go later, clinical phase 2 or 3, we are about 10, 20, 30%. What is the message to drug developers when they hear such statistics? Why should they keep working and why does it matter to the world?
Well, clearly there's a tremendous amount of unmet need out there, and patients and individuals and families and their caregivers are clearly suffering. And I think if you spend time with the individuals that are dealing with the disease, it really opens up and rekindles the passion. I think a lot of us enter this industry because we want to make a difference.
Mm.
And, we grind through the years, and it's hard to remember that from time to time when you're sitting in a desk in a home office and not being exposed. I really encourage everyone to the extent that you can to get out and engage with the patients, especially in like a disease, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And you see the challenges that these families have to I mean, as an example, so you take a 10-year-old boy, he'd like to go to a birthday party. He needs to know, will his wheelchair fit through the door when he gets to the birthday party? And then, he may have gut motility issues and, have to have a scheduled time in the bathroom, et cetera. And is the bathroom accessible? And then just, even traveling there, do you need a special van with the wheelchair and everything? It's those issues in that engagement, I think, that really does drive home the need to continue advancing important drugs. And clearly there's plenty of opportunity out there still.
Yeah, I totally agree. It saves lives and definitely makes the lives of many people much, much better, even if the odds are so low to bring a drug to the market. But what we need is all the experience that people put together and all the know-how and findings and also the studies that don't work. Without that, there is no advancement.
Well, it's the other thing about science is there's never a clear path, is there?
Yeah.
And Edison, 10,000 tries at generating a light bulb with different filaments, et cetera. Through the years, I think we've gotten much better at targeting and using new tools to be able to refine that. But I think still today, the complexity of the diseases that we're dealing with, I, I don't know if we underestimate them, but I do think that we take somewhat of a reductionist approach to things and that there's one simple solution. But I think the reality in many of these complex diseases, there's not one simple solution, and it's just uncovering the different possibilities and then solving for those potential possibilities.
Yeah, that's true. I'm curious to hear more about your company. Let's dive deeper into what Sarcomatrix is building that doesn't exist yet, and how could it change care for DMD?
Well, let's see. So today there's no cures for DMD. Uh, the current the current modalities, whether it's gene editing, CRISPR, or oligonucleotides, exon skipping, they're trying to rebuild a protein that keeps muscles from tearing apart. It's a dystrophin protein. Um, what's missing is that there's three types of muscle. There's also cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, in addition to skeletal muscle. And the current therapies, basically what they're doing is they're delaying disease progression,
Mm.
but they're not rebuilding muscle or halting disease progression. And I think with our small molecules, they'll affect the three different types of muscle, which is really important. And I think we have the potential to, whether alone or in combination, to be actually halt the disease as the next step. And I believe that we'll actually be able to read, based on our early clinical data, we'll be able to actually regenerate muscle that was lost or at least do a better job of rebuilding lost muscle as we go forward.
So, do I have the right understanding? Currently, there's no treatment on the market that offers a solution to the disease. It's just stopping the progression or slowing down the progression of disease, but nothing that has the potential to heal the disease entirely.
Yes, you have that correct.
So, it's a huge unmet medical need, I guess, still.
It still is. I think there are a couple of things in the muscular dystrophy market. I think there's a perception that Duchenne is muscular dystrophy,
Mhm.
but it happens. I think Duchenne is probably 25% of all muscular dystrophy patients because there's 30 different types of muscular dystrophy with all these different nuances. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then the other thing is, when we start bringing, four or five drugs to the market in a certain space, it's almost like there's this perception, well, we solve for it. Okay, so I'm not going to invest anymore in Duchenne because, there's drugs and everything's taken care of. I think it's the thoughtful VC or the thoughtful investor that really spends time to dig into the data and say, okay, what's clinically meaningful? And right now, the drugs are being improved based on a biomarker, increased expression of dystrophin. But the question is that clinically meaningful? Because we're seeing an increase of, let's say, single digit increase in dystrophin expression. It's meaningful in that I can raise my arms up and feed myself where previously I couldn't. That's don't get me wrong, that's incredibly meaningful.
Mm.
But the ultimate goal is to stand up out of the wheelchair and be able to walk and have full mobility. And to do that, you probably need to see an expression of dystrophin in the probably 20 to 40% range, and we're just not there yet. So there's a lot of room for improvement in Duchenne still.
Yeah. You decided to go with small molecules. Can you give a description what your molecule is doing in a way that a 15-year-old can understand it?
15-year-old?
15,
Okay.
15, 15, 1, 5. So,
Okay. Yeah. So our small molecule, let's step back a little bit. There is a lot of the action in muscle repair happens on the sarcolemma or the muscle fiber membrane. And there's two key structural proteins, the dystrophin glycoprotein complex, which all the other drugs address. And what that does is it keeps the muscle from tearing apart. But the more important, from my perspective, protein is alpha 7 beta 1 integrin. And what this does, it's technically a mechanical transducer, meaning
Mhm.
that when you stretch and break the muscle fiber, it turns the switch on for myogenesis. And when we're healthy and we exercise, as an example, for a 2 to 3 day period, this protein will increase expression 2 to 300% for a day or two, trigger myogenesis, and then we rebuild our muscle. Our small molecules modify the gene that transcribes. It's getting a little more technical than a 15-year-old, but it transcribes for the alpha 7 beta 1 protein independent of exercise or muscle tear. So it's basically a muscle mime or an exercise mimetic, or we can force the body to repair itself without exercise, if you will.
And this helps the patient at the end of the day. So this process is disrupted in the patient.
Yeah, in a Duchenne patient, when the dystrophin glycoprotein complex is not there, then the
Mhm.
muscle's being torn apart because there's not integrity. This protein will try to upregulate naturally about 50%. And what we do is we can increase that to 2 to 300% in all muscle types. So we're upregulating a system beyond what it would naturally do in a therapeutic way to make a difference and rebuild muscle.
So it starts rebuilding the muscles in the patient, which gives then back quality of life. So with simple things you mentioned, being able to move your arm and feed yourself again.
Yes.
Ideally, in the ideal world, full functionality so that they can stand up from the wheelchair and navigate the world by themselves.
Yeah, I think the goal for muscular dystrophy, Duchenne in the next 10 years should be extend lifespan. If we could double lifespan from roughly 29 years on average now to a more normal like 60-ish years, I think we could do that. And then more importantly, right now it's a progressive disease that starts at birth. So it's a very unfortunate thing because your boy looks fairly normal until they're 2 or 3, but then they start getting a little more clumsy. And then the diagnosis comes, and they can still keep up with their friends and do the normal things until they're about 10.
Mm.
And then they hit this disease progression just advances significantly. And literally within months or years, you're in a wheelchair. And then several years after that, ventilation support, and then things, all the challenges that come with that. I think that in addition to doubling the lifespan, we can probably keep these boys and some girls out of the wheelchair probably for a decade or two, and then delay ventilation support for a decade or two. So it's not just lifespan. I think it's, quality of life issues that will significantly increase in the next 10 years.
So the disease starts basically with birth, and it's
It's
mostly
a
children.
genetic Yeah, it's a genetic disease. It's one of the most common uh, single point Mendelian mutation genetic diseases that are out there right now. And 1 in 3,500 male births will deal with this.
Only the males.
Tends to be the male. The mom is a carrier, but
Mm.
so females are protected, but mostly male.
So what your drug does, if it works, is giving them basically back a whole life,
I hope so.
because currently they don't have it.
They have a life. They have a challenging life, and
Mm.
and when you talk to the individuals in this community, they really don't think of themselves as patients.
Mm.
They're individuals that happen to have a disability that they're dealing with, and I'm incredibly inspired by the positive spirit that so many of these families have. And if you look at the Duchenne community, it's a really well tight community of patient support groups and camps that the kids can go to and all the quality of life support systems that you would want to wrap around them. And I'd recommend anyone in any other rare disease space to really look at that model on how you can support the individual with the disease in addition to fundamentally find treatments and the cure eventually. But it's a wonderful place and a very uh, committed patient advocacy group and teams and family support groups.
That's definitely very helpful for the kids. And you push it a notch further with your team and say, let's go and heal that entirely and give them the maximum quality of life beyond what the groups currently are doing so that you significantly help them taking the last step to health. I'm curious to hear, you decided, I mean, we're at 2025 and you decided to work with small molecules. When I started in the industry in 2006, it was all about small molecules. Then it became
Yeah.
biologics, and then it became other things, gene therapy, CRISPR, and it just evolved. And I always had the feeling small molecules are not hip anymore and not sexy anymore. Why did you decide for a small molecule?
Well, I think it's a fair statement. They're somewhat out of favor. I think the beauty of the small molecules, its ability to penetrate membranes and get to all targets. Now,
Mm,
the weakness of the small molecule is it penetrates all membranes and gets to all targets. So it's tricky finding the dose, the safety profile that is also efficacious. And I get the challenges that are wrapped around that. But the way that we discovered our small molecules or the Birkin lab at University of Nevada, Reno, like many new disease states, they used a functional phenotypic assay to uncover the basic biology and pathophysiology of the disease. And it just happened that these small molecules would upregulate this protein. And, you know, it I think in a complex disease, when it goes beyond, well, in this case, the three different muscle types, it's kind of set up for a small molecule. Because right now, the gene therapy, the oligonucleotides, they have vectors that will target skeletal muscle only. So, then there is some that are in the clinic right now. They're doing some modifications to support cardiac muscle, which is the next stage. But I think what everyone is forgetting right now is that smooth muscle is critical throughout our body. So it's this kind of whole body approach with small molecules that I think makes them really valuable. And I also think that they're coming back in favor.
mm.
Having talked to VCs over the last 3 years, you're absolutely right. Is it a monoclonal antibody, a biological? Is it gene editing? Those are very much in favor. And then cancer is always in favor. But I think people are starting to realize some of the limitations of some of the gene therapy and the proteins, et cetera, and are going back to small molecules. In fact, I think if you look at the percent of drugs that are approved that are small molecules, it's like 70% every year, somewhere around there. So they're very much needed.
So the data doesn't support the market sentiment around small molecules, basically.
Well, I think that's a fair statement. I haven't looked lately, so I may be off a little bit. I think I did an analysis a few years back, and I think over 90% were small molecules. So.
I'm curious in your decision-making process. Was there a special lab result or patient story around this molecule where you said, let's give it a try, let's select that and move it forward in the drug development process compared to other solutions that might have been interesting?
Yeah, there was really good diseased mice models in the early days. I think that gave us leading indication, and that they actually go back to a zebrafish model, which is a bit of a stretch to translate to humans. But the one that's most important in the Duchenne space, it turns out that golden retriever dogs get a muscular dystrophy that's almost exactly equal to Duchenne.
Mhm.
And so it's an excellent dog model. So there's colonies that are bred that have muscular dystrophy. And we just finished up our study a few months ago in the Duchenne dog model, and what was at first a little disconcerting, but turned out to be a huge win was the lab that we were working with could no longer breed the dogs. So typically, you want to go into a dog that's about 18 months old, that represents a teenager,
Mhm.
when the disease really starts to progress quickly. But our dogs were 5.5 years old, which means they're incredibly diseased, equivalent of a 30, 40-year-old, 30-year-old muscular dystrophy, if you will. And the results we got far exceeded our expectations.
Mm.
We saw dogs that were basically crippled, unable to move, immobile, um, that to the point where they were thinking about sacrificing the animal. And the dog, we have videos after 16 weeks of treatment. The dog is, kind of running down the hallway, wagging its tail, just
Really?
like you would want to see in a dog. So that biomarkers, blood, muscle biopsy analysis, every analysis that we did was really positive. So we're very encouraged if we could take those results and translate them to humans. I think we've got a huge win here.
At which development stage is your drug currently?
We're ready for phase 1B model, clinical development. We've got the CMC manufacturing spun up, technical operations, quality systems in place. We've manufactured a GLP grade batch. We've got GMP planning on the horizon. We've got IT infrastructure with quality systems and cybersecurity in place. So we're all ready to go. We've got all the vendors defined. I've done as much planning as I can do without funding, and that's the rate limiting step right now is the funding. Now, what's a little different about development in Duchenne is it's basically a phase one and then a phase two accelerated approval. So what we'll do in our phase one is we'll do the typical SAD, MAD safety studies. But then at the end of the MAD phase, we're going to enroll about 10 diseased patients so that we can get early signals of efficacy. And we believe that that's an inflection point that's going to make it sense to VCs and other investors that were a little more reluctant to jump on board and help us out.
So you get patients already in the first, I think phase 1B must be a study with 10
Yep,
patients where you have an early efficacy readout.
exactly. Exactly. It's critically important. And we all know that data drives investment nowadays. And it's one thing in a small molecule to have safety, which is the typical phase one study. And, with your deep experience, that jumps out at you. But I think we've got an opportunity to drop in some early efficacy signals that are going to be relevant and meaningful.
I believe VCs like that. When I talk with scientists, you always get a pushback to this approach where they say, okay, 10 is not meaningful, statistically not relevant. You need to wait for the phase two. But then there is always the funding problem. What is your perception? Is it difficult these days to discuss with the regulators and with scientists for such an approach to say, okay, let's go directly to the patient?
Um, we're fortunate in that there's been many clinical studies before us that are successful and
Mm.
many that have failed. And so the path to development in Duchenne is pretty clear. Um, Once you do your safety studies, then if you have a biomarker like we do, we've talked to the FDA and they agree that alpha 7 beta 1 integrin expression on the muscle protein fiber is a very good a biomarker for accelerated approval. Um, then we would go into a study, let's say we'll probably do a crossover study. So we'll have 16 weeks on treatment, maybe 80 patients, placebo controlled, maybe two different doses, a washout period, and then we'll cross over and then another 16 weeks on treatment. So it's a relatively short development time frame. And we're addressing one of the key issues with Duchenne is the problem we've had with Duchenne is the time to disease progression varies significantly from patient to patient, and then the rate of disease progression varies significantly. So it's been very hard to say this is like use a synthetic control for your placebo. There's just too much variation in the patient. But by doing this crossover study, we can eliminate that because we're doing direct comparisons with individual patients.
Yeah, that's good to know. It's good to know. So probably we'll have the first results when you close the funding round in 1 to 2 years after the funding closes.
Oh, if we had funding right now, we would have a readout in early 2026 on phase one.
Really? It's
Yeah,
it's 1 year basically, 12 months.
yeah.
From
Yeah, in fact, if you look at Sarepta's, the last couple of drugs they've gotten approved, they've gone from preclinical to regulatory approval in 3.5 years.
Mhm.
And I think it's clearly it's the benefits of all the programs that the FDA allows, fast track, breakthrough status, accelerated approval, and then these adaptive trial designs. And then I think what will allow us to recruit really quickly is we'll be using a distributed clinical trial approach where we'll have brick and mortar sites along with centralized IRB and then distributed
Mhm.
trials so that we can capture the patient in the smaller communities and really improve our ability to recruit patients.
Yeah, that's true. This is one of the main concerns of VCs when they invest in the rare disease space. If recruitment lasts for years before you have any efficacy signal. But in your case, given that you get $5 million, you can come back with results on the safety and efficacy side,
Yes.
at least early readouts, at least 10 people in less than 12 months.
Yeah, in addition to, and there's quite a few different variables that we would test. So, creatinine kinase is a really good indicator of muscle damage.
Mm.
In the dogs, we saw rates drop from 100,000 units per liter down to almost normal within about a 2-week period. So, we see an effect very quickly on biomarkers. And so, we would look at liver enzymes normalized very quickly. Um, all the blood markers look really good. And then we'll do muscle biopsies and we can go in and count muscle fibers, look at the thickness of the muscle fibers, and then test the different strength, whether it's short-term stress or long-term stress, et cetera. So there's a lot of different, I think that helps too. Although the N of 10 is relatively low, the number of different variables that we can test per patient is relatively high.
And your clinical advisory report is positive that given the data, then they can make an educated decision to recommend moving the clinical trial forward or the compound forward into the phase 2 trials with about, you said, more than $25 million, or say the data is not good enough to support the trial and you reduce the risk then.
Yes. Yeah, a couple of things that we're very fortunate is we do have good support from the FDA
Mhm.
because these drugs were developed in collaboration with NCATS at the FDA. So they've been very supportive of our program. And they did a IND enabling assessment last November. And they looked at all our data and looked at a gap analysis. And they basically said, you have enough data to go forward first in human trials in Australia, where uh, the the bar to enter there is a little bit lower. But in a small molecule, as long as you have mouse and rat data, that's usually good enough. But we also have dog data on top of that. So I think we're in really good shape to do those trials starting in Australia. And then the Treat Neuromuscular Disease, Treat NMD group, is a global network that's trying to accelerate development in neuromuscular diseases. They have a technology review process. They call it the TACT, Technology Assessment and Critical. I forget the acronym, frankly, but they've generously offered to do they usually meet in March and September. But they found out that our drug was advancing, and they felt it was so important that they scheduled an interim meeting. So on July 29th, we'll be presenting to the TAC group. And what comes out of that is a very detailed assessment, independent assessment of the likelihood of success, the characteristics of the drug. They're very good about advising on clinical trial design. They're very good about ensuring that patient input and provider input with quality of life studies are engaged. All the things that you would want in a really good, robust clinical development program that they're going to help publish a paper and have that available.
To sum it up for me, so this your seed round with 5 million is not to fund lead selection, establishing a production process. You already have that, and you already are in touch with the FDA and have approval to move forward in the clinical trial. So your seed round actually is to bring the lead compound into the clinical phase 1. Do I have the right understanding?
Correct. Yeah. And to complete the phase 1 with the 10 disease patients. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is important for investors when they listen to the episodes that seed means you go into clinic, and seed doesn't mean you start a company right now, needs to find a
Oh,
team
yeah.
and
Yeah.
move forward. So
No,
you're,
no, we've been very fortunate. The Berken Lab at the University of Nevada, Reno, they have raised 8 million in NIH grant money,
mm,
non-dilutive. And frankly, when I showed up 3 years ago, there was a tremendous amount of preclinical work that was already completed. Short and long-term mouse studies, short and long-term cardiac studies in mice, rat studies that were already done, and then they designed the dog study. So there's a tremendous amount of data all the way already there. So we're packaging it all up and then bringing it forward to the marketplace as quickly as possible.
Before we dive into fundraising in this year, let's dive a little bit into market access. But let me ask you one question first. Is there something open that you want to tackle about Sarcomatrix molecules? Is there a question that I forgot to ask you?
No, it's a great question. And that's one of the challenges we're having in fundraising, and I'll just be very transparent here, is when you use a functional or phenotypic assay, it gives you indications of what the mechanism of action is. As an example, today, even with SSRIs like Prozac, they know the basic mechanism of action, but they really don't know the totality of the mechanism of action. They don't know the impact on gene expression long term or long term modifications of the body, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where we're at right now. We know that our molecules increase alpha 7 beta 1 integrin. We know that that integrin triggers myogenesis naturally in the body, and we're elucidating the exact pathways, and we're pretty close with a couple $100,000. Frankly, we could elucidate the pathway, but funding is really, really tight. But we would like to advance it to the point where we know the exact mechanism of action, and we will. But right now, I think it's got so much early indicators in a phenotypic model and so much success in the early animal studies that it warrants advancing the drug to the market.
Why is this such a problem that having knowledge gaps in the exact mechanism of action blocks funding?
Well, I think we're just with the level of science that we have right now, there's a perception that if I understand the target
Mm.
and then I can model the target with crystallography or the new computer techniques, then I can design a small molecule that's going to fit perfectly, especially with a lot of the AI tools right now. Um, and that would significantly de-risk the program is the perception. Now, I'm a little skeptical about the AI tools. It looks like combinatorial chemistry to me, just a lot faster with better tools. And then there's a lot of characteristics of a small molecule, whether it's absorption or the Kapinski scale variables, et cetera, that are really important to address. So it goes well beyond just understanding the binding pocket in the small molecule. I mean, it's really helpful to know that. I get that, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. And clearly, there's drugs that have been approved recently that they don't understand the mechanism of action either. But it's such a critical unmet need, and the drug
Mhm.
works, then bring it to market.
What's the FDA's position on that?
FDA is very positive about our program. They think it's a unique first-in-class therapy. Because of that, they tend to allocate more resources through the review process, and you get a lot of extra attention as compared to, like another GLP-1 or PD-1 type drug. Those don't get quite the attention as a breakthrough like this does.
I mean, when I come from the commercial point of view, I always thought when you see an improvement in the outcome, so you have an indication that it works, even if you don't understand clearly why it works, but you know that
Mhm.
it works. So from my point of view, when we talk about de-risking, it's more beneficial to go directly into patients to understand, okay, can we replicate what we see in animals also in the human model? Uh, or can't we? Because everything else, then the details behind it, if you don't see any effect in the humans, you probably should drop it because whatever you do with the
Yeah.
molecule and with the target, if you don't see a little bit in humans, it doesn't make sense. And you can always come then back later when you say, okay, we have some effects in humans. Now let's work on understanding it. I never understood why it seems to very often be on the market the other way around. First, understand all the details in the science and then move in the human. But why is
Well,
that?
you and I are both old school. We've been around for 30, 40 years. So we've seen all the different ways of development. And that is a very classic
Mm,
very effective approach. And I think it's just not top of mind with a lot of investors nowadays. I think investors are, they're looking, well, first of all, I think gene editing and CRISPR is really sexy. I mean,
mm,
don't get me wrong. I mean, that's an ultimate solution for a lot of different diseases. I have a theory that I think it's very early and there's a lot of things to work out there. But the tried and true is the small molecule for a variety of different reasons. There's a proven regulatory pathway. Um, the reimbursement supports that. It's relatively inexpensive to make so that you can make the drug available to many more people. And in these phenotypic assays, clearly have indicators of success. I do agree that when you take it from animals to humans, that's a bit of a leap, but it seems to me like we're modifying the body's natural processes in a very logical way that makes sense that it would work in humans.
mm. Yeah, let's see. Let's see. How is the fundraising going?
It's horrible.
It's okay.
No, no, I would say this that I've been working on it for 3 years, and initially we came out and we thought, okay, let's do a 65 million Series A,
Mm,
and I happened to start this in mid 2020, early 2021, right when things were drying up. And I get why the VCs are really holding their dry powders for their wins that are in their portfolio today. I completely understand that. In fact, when I talk to VCs, Chris Garabedian at Ontology or Corey Goodman at VenBio, they'll basically say, listen, during the COVID days, the go-go days there, we probably overinvested by a factor of 2 to 3. And we're just going to have to let those companies wash out. And you can see that they are right now. They're consolidating, they're folding down. There's a lot of reduction in force going on right now. So the market is taking care of itself, if you will. It's just hard when you sit back and you think about a progressive disease like Duchenne, where every day the individual loses a little bit more muscle function. And that has nothing to do with the ability to raise money or an investment. So I think it takes a special investor to really understand, okay, it's a critical unmet need. It's a very promising program. I understand it's very high risk, high reward. And let's go ahead and at least invest a little bit is the way I think about it right now. And that seems to be playing pretty well. So the Series A didn't go over very well. I actually, I tried everything. I went back and I thought, well, I'll do a crowdfunding campaign and reach out to friends and family that have of these individuals. Well, it turns out that these individuals are spending any exit a lot of the time. Don't get me wrong, it's not 100% of the time, but they're spending so much money taking care of that individual that they just don't have extra funds. And then the patient advocacy groups, whether it's Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, Cure Duchenne, or the Jet Foundation right now, they spent a lot of money on the gene editing programs several years ago to the point where they haven't replenished their pool of funds available for new investments. And also, I think there's still a lot of focus on gene editing as the ultimate solution, and it is. But considering in my mind, it's probably at least a decade away from having a real solution. There's an opportunity now to really make a very strong incremental improvement very quickly in the next 2 to 3 years, as opposed to waiting 10 to 20 years for gene editing for the ultimate solution, if you will.
yeah, I think
And then
also.
there's also this perception is, well, if I solve the disease through gene editing, then is there a market available? Well, muscular dystrophy is so complex. There's clearly going to be a market available for multimodality going long term.
Yeah, gene editing takes some time. I think also the market environment changed. I recently saw a study. Let me just share the screen briefly. Here I have it while I was speaking. So this is
Oh, interesting.
a pitch book study, and it was quite interesting because they said that now in 2025 or 4,
Yeah.
the biotech VC funds raised $12 billion, which is exactly the same amount as back in 2012, where they also raised $12 billion dollars. And in between, in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, the
Yeah.
fundraising activity of VCs peaked in 2018 with $152 billion dollars, and then just dropped off with more public funds flowing in my opinion, during the COVID times, which is not represented here. But actually, it reminds me when I look at the market of what I experienced in fundraising in 2011, 2012, 2013, that there is just not so much money on the market anymore,
Yeah.
currently in this moment.
So I have a theory here, and keep the graph up because I think it's
Mhm.
very relevant. Are you familiar with the Gartner technology adoption cycle?
No, no, explain it to
It's
me.
a model that independent of whatever technology it is, whether it's a new chip for computers or whatever. And basically, the theory is that the slope of enthusiasm would be from 2015 to 2018.
Mhm,
And the apex of enthusiasm would be 2018.
mhm.
And then they call it the slope of disillusion. And the slope of disillusion happens when you
See.
start really uncovering uh, the good and the bad of the technology. That's when the inability to deliver a certain gene with a certain vector, or there's problems with off-target expression, et cetera. That starts coming up. So all the weaknesses come out. And then what we're at right now is then it looks like if it follows the funding cycle, then in 24, 25 and beyond, we'll really figure out how to use these important technologies. And then the slope goes back up again. We're
Mhm.
actually using it. So um, I wrote a first opinion piece on that and sent it into First Stat a while back, and the editor basically said, "Listen, I think you're probably absolutely right, but I'm not going to publish it because um, it may not land so well with my community that I'm talking to." So
No, you're definitely right. When I looked at this graph, I thought, I mean, I don't think it's inflation adjusted. It means in 2024, we have less funds available than in 2020, 2012.
yeah,
Just due to inflation, especially here in Europe, the last years were horrible. So the good thing is, in my opinion, as you mentioned, that we are at the bottom now, and the
yeah.
future should be brighter.
Well, here's what keeps me going every day is a friend of mine reminded me that Google and Facebook were started at a very difficult time to raise funds. So my theory is that the bar to funding is higher,
Mhm.
which means that we'll have a much better strategy, business plan, more thoughtful financials, and better execution, all planned and ready to go. And if I can jump over that bar with a reasonable investment right now, I think the likelihood of success for the company is going to be higher than it would have been. Mostly
I
because it's been such a struggle. It's the gristmill of preparation that's going to make us effective.
I totally agree. And when we look in biotech, I think also CRISPR and Intellia started 2012-ish, 13-ish,
Yeah,
when they were low. And then, of course, were in the right position when the market peaked and funding was available. You're at the same spot, basically. So it's now you have to go through the winter, and then your company's at the right spot when more funding flows into the biotech space again.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of headwinds right now. There's no doubt about it. But I do think that we're going through the nadir of the cycle. Hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I know it. You raised with your company also $8 million in NIH non-dilutive grants. What are the
Yeah.
lessons that you learned?
Well, I was very pleased to see that the Birkin lab had met with the FDA early on to discuss what preclinical studies should be done with that money. And they were very good about doing that. So a lot of the preclinical work was already done. I've worked with other labs in the past where and it's the typical researcher, right? They're not really focused. A new test will come out and they want to use that in their program, and so they'll go down that pathway. But I call it the bright shiny ball syndrome. You're chasing whatever's bright and shiny, and you forget about the path. And that's frankly some of this, the challenges I think with working with these research teams is, listen, I understand that you would like to do all this basic research, and we'll get there. But today we need to focus on what is all IND enabling studies, period. That's it. And then we'll get it through the FDA. We'll come back. We'll fund your lab with a lot of money in the future, and you can, do all the basic research when the money's freely available. That's fine. But right now, it's critically important to really focus. And to the credit of the Birkin lab, they had done that even without my intervention or me being as a part of the team.
I think this is one of the most important points in the industry. Basic research always is focused on advancing research and science. And I think the
Yeah,
two key metrics that they have is patents and publications.
yeah,
So every new study they can do leads either to a new patent or a new publication and gives them more points in their community.
right.
While when you run a biotech company, you depend on VC investment. I think not many people in the world have 1 billion to throw into developing a new drug or 2 billion left on the side. So you need the
Yeah,
help of VCs and later the industry. And for VCs, the only thing that matters is speed to IND, speed through
yeah.
clinics, phase one, phase two, phase three, and hopefully an acquisition by a pharma company or a license deal. How do you navigate? What are your learnings? How do you navigate this tension, this conflict of interest? One wants to do a lot of study, and the other one needs to uh, speed up the process. How do you manage that in your company?
Wow, that's a really good question. The way I approached it at the Birkin Lab is I think at the end of the day, it's about execution and teams and alignment. So I started with building trust. Um, uh, Coming in, learning about the lab, what they've done, what their vision is, what's important to them, and what would they like to see next year, and what would they like to see in 5 years and 10 years from now. In his example, Dean Birkin, who leads the lab, he's actually interviewing to be the head of the physiology and cell biology department at the university, and he wants to continue to be a professor. So that was his approach. And then one of his lab, our chief science officer, Ryan Webbles, he's an associate professor right now. But I think at the end of the day, he probably wants to move more towards a pharmaceutical side. So understanding that, what they want, and then building trust level, and then regular communication, these are very busy individuals. You kind of have to pull information out of them, which is fine. But we have weekly meetings where we update everyone, and it's evolving nicely, I think, is a fair statement as we go forward. So building trust, understanding their needs, and then working with them in a way that finesses and guides them and nudges them in the right place, as opposed to dictating, because dictating in this environment doesn't go over very well.
You have a lot of experience up to the market. So you brought drugs to the market. You navigated the clinical phase of drugs and also the early stages. When I talk with founders in the biotech space and come up with the idea we need to plan everything, I get a lot of objections, and some say, no, we don't do it, we don't need it, we just plan the next steps. Others say, no, let's plan it up to the market. What's your position with your experience? How do you tackle the planning process with a company?
Well, I think through the life cycle management, and I ran the strategy group for the Hep B program at Gilead Sciences, and it was a very demanding group that did full life cycle planning before we went into the clinic, with risk adjustment assessments and cost estimates and really good forecasting. Listen, I don't think it needs to be done to that level, because that can be onerous at times, if you will. But you do need to look, I think, at the entire life cycle, step back and really understand the need in the marketplace. Who are the likely competitors that are going to show up? And then, kind of back into, I put together a 15-year plan, a 5-year plan, and a 1-year tactical plan. And then, at least start the process of going through a planning cycle. It doesn't need to be the detailed rigor that we used to do at Merck, where it was I have the manual. I probably shouldn't have it, but it was the product development manual, and the number of reports that they generated was incredible, and the whole process is really rigorous. So it doesn't need to be that level, but you have to have a basic uh, basic process and understanding long term, even before you go in the clinic. Otherwise, you're going to head down the wrong road.
Let's talk a little bit about market access and why this planning matters so much. I'm operating out of Europe, and I very often hear when I talk with founders, especially from the scientific field, I get the comment that a good product and a good science always makes its way through to the market. You don't have to do anything about it. What's your opinion on that statement?
Well, three times now at
Mm.
Amgen in the early days, at Gilead in the early days, and at Portola, not so much Portola, but when I showed up as one of the first commercial leads, the rest of the organization would say, I really don't understand why we need commercial because all we really need is a customer service 1-800 number to take orders and then fill the orders.
Mm.
So, and I get that. Let's say that you've been working on a certain disease area for 2 decades and really diving into that. And all the people that you talk to are also aware of that space, and it's an echo chamber. So I've spent 2 decades talking in my echo chamber about how important this drug is. It's almost implied, well, the rest of the world must know how important it is too. What people forget is that every day we're bombarded with about 7,000 marketing messages in different modalities. And commercialization and marketing and sales is really cutting through all that clutter and spreading the information to the wider universe of who you need to talk to. And I think if you position it that way and talk to the teams that way, it starts resonating more on the need for sales, marketing, market access, et cetera. So,
Yeah, I totally understand it when we talk about the big companies like the Biotechs and Pfizer's and Sanofis of the world, who I think lately acquired Blueprint Medicine. But why should founders care? I often hear, we are not even in phase one, we are at the R&D stage. Let's do some basic research, let's do some basic studies. Let's not care about the future. It's pharma's job. Once we are in phase two, they can figure it out in phase three and have all the right people. Why should founders care about it?
well, I think that's a great question. And I think here's a good example. So, Andexa is a protein um, that sequesters factor 10A. So we got accelerated approval on that biomarker, but it was basically the only primary endpoint. And there was some secondary endpoints. It makes it really challenging if you rush through the regulatory process because you can without important secondary, tertiary endpoints that support marketing and scientific messages. And that's where I think you can really fall into a trap where uh, if I've started that phase, I get through that accelerated approval, and then big pharma takes it over, and you've tied their hands so that they can't say, the 10 most important things about marketing that drug because it wasn't in publications, et cetera. That's a real problem. Now you can make up for that with posters and publication planning and that good stuff, but that means that you're planning ahead and you really understand the need for those publications, et cetera. So, and I think a lot of research teams, especially at smaller universities, they do publish to the extent that they can, but it may not be the top tier journals, and it may not be the
Mm.
frequency that you would want to actually market the product.
Can I sum it up to, if you don't think about marketing a product during the development phase up to clinical phase two, you have a weaker negotiation position potentially with pharma compared to a company, compared to a team who did all the homework and said, look, I mean, this is the path
Yeah.
forward. This is how we will administer it to patients. This is how the healthcare system might respond. These are the 10 most important marketing messages. You can just negotiate a better price at the end of the day.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. That's a great observation.
Ah, that's good to know. That's good to know. Um, you have now experience in Gilead, in Amgen, in Alexion, in Portola, a range of biotech companies, which names I forgot, unfortunately.
Oh, that's
Um,
okay.
how all these experiences from market and development, how does it shape your leadership style at your current company?
Well, I think through the years, um, Mike Inouye, a long time ago, he said to me, leadership is really pretty basic. He said, you need to be a continuous learner and extremely knowledgeable about the domain in which you're marketing, commercializing the product. And then you need to behave in such a way that people want to follow you.
Mhm.
And that always rings true to me. And what that suggests to me is that it goes well beyond technical understanding and technical expertise. And it's really the soft skills of empathy, of team building, of bringing the best out of each individual, and then coalescing that together in such a way that they're really deeply motivated to the point where it's not just checking the boxes on their objectives for their performance review, but they really understand what we're trying to do. And one thing I do when I walk around is, and I learned this from George Rathman because he used to do this.
Mhm.
He would say, David, what did you do today that advanced our program to the patient? And even if it's a little thing, if you can't say at least one little thing that you did today that advanced the program, then your focus is off. So I use that same technique. I'll walk to, talk to the different groups and say, what did we do today? What did you do today? So it's a great way to communicate, I think, and to get alignment and focus.
I totally agree. Empathy and leadership matters a lot. I like the question that you ask, what do you do today? But how do you manage that it comes across the right way to recalibrate the focus and not like an accusation? So, did you do anything important today or just being
That's a great
around?
question. I hadn't even thought about it that way. That's a really good way to think about it. I think it really starts with, how genuine you are as a leader.
Mm,
Now, George Mathman, we were all young. We were in the 20s and 30s, and this man would give these company-wide speeches, and he was so passionate, so genuinely passionate about what we were doing. It wasn't uncommon that he would be reduced to tears at the end of these presentations. And I tell you, at the end of that presentation, if George Rathman said, "David, go put your head through that brick wall right over there," I would have done it. That's how motivating it is. So I think it starts with a genuine passion to make a difference and to focus on the patient. And I know VCs look at it in a different way, but when you're leading a pharma company, it's that desire to deliver results and an unmet need and make a difference in a human's life that really aligns resources and motivates people. I think is a really critical thing to focus on. And it starts with the individual and the leader, and they set the tone.
totally agree. I have one follow-up question today. To that what you said. When I look at the beginning of a company, everybody's passionate because there have not been any problems, and some are lucky and get a lot of funding, like 8 million NIH, or here in Europe, some European Union grants. But
Yeah,
then you get really into the game, and then
yeah,
the team experiences a lot of hardships. You don't get the partners that you want. You can't hire the people that you want to have. Funding is running out. People start leaving, there is a founders clash, and it's really hard running a company. What's your
yeah.
secret? How do you keep your passion and your positivity alive and not reverting to negativity and just say, okay, let's drop it and let's do something else?
Well, like I said earlier, Christian, I think, engaging with the patients, the families, the caregivers really is important on a regular
Mm,
basis. One thing that Amgen did that was really different and very unique, and I've actually called up some of my colleagues in the last year and I said, do I remember this as special as it was, or am I just kind of making things up? And they all agreed that it was really special. And then I was thinking, well, what did they do differently in Amgen? And what they did is they actually had the HR group there was very focused on developing a culture, individual skills, team-oriented skills. And it was kind of annoying because we're really, really busy, right? And they say, okay, well, you have to go to this team building, half a day sessions, et cetera, et cetera. But it was really valuable because when you grow explosive growth, when you go from 100 employees to 5,000 employees, keeping the alignment, the culture, and the kind of the vigor there is really an issue. And I think it takes a special HR person. And then finally, I'll add is I have I mentioned earlier that I have family members with muscular dystrophy. And
mm,
3 years ago, when I started this, my niece, Chloe Nickel Craig, she was still alive. And unfortunately, she passed away this last February 20th
Oh, sorry to hear that.
at the age of 31. So she's she's my Northern Star. And and she constantly reminds me every day. I keep a picture of her up on my desk that the reason why we're doing this is to help individuals like her so that they don't pass away when they're 31. And that makes a big difference with me personally.
Sorry to hear that. It must have been hard for you.
Yeah, it was. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been, it was a challenging time, but, and some days I think I'm over it, and then other days I'm not. But she was a special young lady.
Can we move forward with the questions, or do you
Yeah.
want to, to stay with?
No, no, I'm fine. Thanks.
When you not only you talked about explosive growth from 100 to 5,000 employees. What was the biggest growth that you witnessed in biotech and pharma?
Well, I think it was at Amgen when I started in 89, we were 110. And when I left in 94, 95, I think it was close to 6,000 employees. So that was the most explosive growth. And, some of the things that I learned there is even, having enough office space can be a challenge because we Amgen started in a very nondescript tilt up buildings in a um, outside of Los Angeles, and there was nothing special about it. And as we would grow and we didn't have capacity, we would rent trailers, and your office would be a trailer out in the parking lot for a while until you caught up. So uh, there's just a lot of things with that explosive growth and that uh, that you need to handle.
How do you maintain culture in that growth? I just can imagine when a lot of, I mean, you have a small team, you start with a small team,
Yeah,
and then you grow it up to 100, and from a leadership perspective, leaders have still the possibility to know everybody by name and
yeah.
interact with people, maybe not on a daily basis, but frequently,
No, you're
and
absolutely right.
involve them. Then you have this growth, as you said, up to 6,000.
Yeah,
And it's, in my opinion, it's impossible to interact with every employee of the 6,000. And in companies that I experienced, there was always this tension from the early employees. I said, okay, before I was involved in decision making, now I'm not, and they start taking it personal. And there is
yeah,
always this danger of a culture flipping from a high trust environment
yeah.
into an environment that is a little bit low trust. How do you, what's your experience? What need leaders do that they maintain a high level of trust? Because I mean, maybe it's important to move forward quickly, fast with the company. If there is no trust, there is no movement.
Right. That's a great question. I think you're absolutely right. Up to about 150 people, you kind of know everyone or you've met them. In fact, I think the Gore-Tex company, I don't know if they do this anymore, but the way they handled that was as soon as they hit 150 people, they would break off uh, another company location or department, if you will. And so I don't know if they still have it now, but I remember looking at that a while back where they had just many two groups of 150 people to address that. Now that sounds a little discontinuous and a little chaotic to me. Um, I, like I said earlier, I think it starts with the leader. I think you need to emphasize organization development, and that includes culture, individual development, performance, etc. And then you need to put programs in place that facilitate and force that engagement, if you will, whether it's an annual strategic planning session or quarterly, group meetings, et cetera. A couple things that worked really well. Amgen used to have, they called it the fermentation seminar. So every Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, they would have cocktails and beer out on the front lawn. And the objective there was, go up to someone that you don't know and introduce yourself and find out what they do. So it's a very nice informal way. Another thing that Portola did that I thought that was really thoughtful is what they would do is we would, different departments would invite other people to come to present to them on their role, how they fit into the greater good, and how we could possibly work together. And then just the informal, whether it's uh, a small award that you give for certain types of behavior. All those things together, I think, make a difference. But I think what you really need to focus on is these HR groups nowadays. They tend, in my mind, to focus on risk management. I'm going to do a DEI program.
Mm.
Here's sexual harassment, et cetera, et cetera. Check the box and then move on. That is such a small piece of HR, human resources, and organization development that I think it's a big miss if you don't add that and really focus on that.
So you're an advocate for the human factor in companies, basically sitting down with people, giving them a stage, talking about their worries, sunshining their successes, but
Yeah,
also giving them a possibility to share their failures and what problems they face in the organization. It's what we say in Europe, let's go for a beer and talk.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point about failure too. Is the biggest difference. Well, one of the biggest difference that I saw big pharma versus startups. It's all about risk and willingness to take risk. We actually learn more when things don't work out than when they do work out. And the trust environment is so critical because um, what Amgen used to say, and George used to say, is listen, I don't mind if you make a mistake as long as it's not fatal. Don't
Mhm.
call up the FDA and share some information you shouldn't. That's fatal. As long as it's not fatal, and then don't repeat it, you know. So learn from what you've done and grow. And that opened up the environment so that we can actually talk about the mistakes and address those issues and get ahead of them and learn from them collectively. And I think that's pretty unique because some of the big pharmas that I've interacted with, they're very risk averse. Uh, their culture is just so much less risk tolerant, and then also when you talk to PhDs, they never want to admit that they don't know something, right? And so you have to let them know, listen, it's okay. As we age, especially, it's just as important to know what you don't know as it is what you do know, because
Mhm.
for the things that you don't know, you can collaborate, fill in, learn, grow, etc. And that's an important thing that I think that we need to focus on as we grow.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You not only have experience with small and medium-sized companies up to big-sized biotech with 6,000, you also have experience with merger and acquisition. I saw in your Vita that you were head of market access at Alexion during its $39 billion acquisition by AstraZeneca.
Yeah.
And this is the glorious endpoint every founder dreams of. So my company gets acquired for $39 billion after I've built it to a
Yeah.
6,000 employees thing. What was that acquisition like from the inside?
It's a very interesting dynamic. First of all, the cultural differences just jump out immediately, and I think a lot of it goes back to what I was talking about risk. To start a small biotech company, you have to take risks.
Mm,
And in market access, as an example, we had a program at Portola whether we would go into hospitals, help the clinical pharmacists put together a protocol, and then we had workshops where we would work with billing and coding and then revenue recognition to accelerate the adoption of a drug. In a hospital space in the United States, that can take, with a new drug, an expensive drug especially, it can take, up to a year or more, or even 2 years. And we compressed that down to about, 3 months. And then there was also another reimbursement program called the New Technology Add-on Payment here, which pays for expensive drugs within our GRG system. So we would introduce that too. Well, as we migrated over to Alexion, their risk profile was significantly less. So we had to kind of peel off some of that program. You can't say this. You have to position it as educational. It looks like what you're doing here is too much like consulting. You can't do that. And then when AstraZeneca bought Alexion, they kind of shut the whole thing down. They said, listen, what you were doing earlier is too much risk because we've got all these other drugs. We can't afford to have, um, a bad actor in any way or a bad program in any way. So the whole thing shut down. So it's just interesting, how do you navigate the adjustments as you go forward in a very professional way. It was a challenge. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I believe that. What are your three most important learnings that you can use for your company that you made back in this time when you experienced this cultural clash?
Three most important learnings about this cultural clash. Um, well, I think first of all, there's a dynamic that the acquiring company will have a set of assumptions, and they basically if I had to boil it down, is we're bigger and smarter than you are, so we can do it better. And I know that sounds
Mm,
pretty critical. So you'll go in, and because I was doing the asset transfer, I would go in and meet with the cross-functional team and the acquiring company. And when you start looking at the market research you've done, the strategy, the programs that you have in place, the quality of the people that you had, it takes a couple of months and many meetings, but after a while, it basically is like, wow, you guys, you really did know what you were doing. Okay. So you can build on that, which is good. Um, so that's one learning. The other thing is just the differences in the personalities. I think it's really critical, or the way that organizations work. It's just really critical, especially for the first 90 days when you go in, to really ask a lot of questions and listen and really try to understand decision-making process, who the key players are, and how do you move it forward in the most productive way. And then finally, I think you just have to really keep an open mind. Um, you know, um, I, there was one example where the company thought, well, what we'll do is we'll lower the cost of the drug, and then it'll sell a lot more in the market. Well, if you run the numbers, you couldn't make up for in volume what you lost in margin. And so I would recommend doing a clinical differentiation study to
mm.
support the higher cost. And frankly, that didn't go over real well, and they weren't listening. And at some point you say, okay, it's your program, you're going to run it the way that you want. And then years later, I look back on it, and I was probably right. It probably would have been a better spend to differentiate and keep the margins. But at some point, it's their asset, and you let them take the asset and do what they will with it.
How is the acquisition process when you're in the company? I'm thinking about you work for a minimum of 1 to 2 years on both ends to make the acquisition happen. And until this point, the companies are pretty separated. Then there is this moment in time where both leadership teams and owners ink the acquisition and it's done. It's one day.
Yeah.
What's the phase afterwards, the first 100 days? Is it a gradual process or is it a sudden process that everything changes?
Oh, I think it's fair to say it's gradual. Yeah.
Mm,
Um, well, I think to do it well, it would be gradual. Um, another thing I learned is that when you're being acquired, and it's likely that you'll do the asset transfer, the information transfer, and get things going, and then you won't have a job because that job's been allocated, or there's a person in the acquiring company that is going to step in and take over. I think you need to accept that, and then be a very good corporate soldier and very value driven to really benefit the greater good, the good of the acquisition, the good of the patients, et cetera. And it's not an easy thing to do. I think there's a lot of acquisitions that haven't worked out so well.
Yeah, the
So
most important, I totally agree. The most important phase of an acquisition is the time after the acquisition. And this is really often completely underestimated, the complexity of bringing two teams together.
Oh, at Portola, I built the fully integrated data warehouse we did that ran across. It was the most, this is 30 years of learning that we built this thing to the point where the executives would wake up in the morning and previous day's sales were on their phone and metrics were on their phone, updated by 8 o'clock in the morning every day. And and then we had automated all the performance reporting, and it was a very elegant solution. And then you get acquired, and it doesn't fit within the IT framework of the acquiring company, so they throw it all out. And it's it was a little disappointing, frankly, because I would like to say, okay, here's what we have.
Mhm.
Let's make your IT group better. How can I spend more time with you to see if we can evolve your IT group? But it just wasn't uh, the step that they wanted to take. And I get that, so that's
It's
kind of a small example of what can happen.
That's a good point. Let me tie it back to the startup world, biotech startup world. When I talk to founders these days and also new VC funds, there is always this idea acquisition first. So we build a company and in 18 months we get it acquired. We build it to
Yeah.
partner. And then when I look over, I'm talking about especially here in Europe, and when I look more towards California, there is more this visionary thinking like Genentech, Amgen. We want to build something that lasts, and acquisition might happen, but it's not our initial intent. How do you think about this tension or these two poles of building to partner and building to last? Is this a contradiction or can it go together?
I think it goes together, and frankly, I think that there's one way to do it, and this is my personal opinion. You build and fund to long-term success, but along the way, you remain open to acquisitions or an exit strategy. And what that allows you to do is to really do the good planning and the forward thinking and the strategy well beyond the phase two and into commercialization that you really need to do to optimize up until your phase two. This idea that, I'm going to develop it to phase two proof of concept. Yeah, does it work? Yeah, it works, but I think a better strategy is let's just assume we're going to do it on our own. And I know that VCs don't like to hear this, okay? But assume you're going to do it on your own. Try to fund it to do it on your own. Try to build your own. And and I think that's the best way to go. Now I look at what we're doing at Sarcomatrix, and it really reminds me of Amgen in the very early days and Gilead in the very early days. And it goes like this: there's a first-in-class drug that's addressing a true unmet need that has a very concentrated and accessible marketplace. So at Amgen, it was Epogen in the dialysis market. At Gilead, it was AIDS and the HIV market. And here in the muscular dystrophy market, there's 90 clinics in the United States and about 450 doctors that treat these patients. So it's a very concentrated, accessible market. So if there is an opportunity uh, to build it and grow it and create the next biotech company. It seems to me like everything's lined up. And that's my strategy. Now, along the way, I recognize that there's a board and you have to be open-minded.
So when we talk about acquisition, I mean fully integrating a company into another company. I don't see so much license deals as an acquisition.
Yeah.
My my question to you in this respect is when you talk to a founder, I mean, I totally agree to what you say that in principle you can't plan an acquisition. It just happens. What you can plan for is building a company because this is something that you can control. But when you talk with a founder who says, my plan is to be acquired in 3 years, what's your advice to them? What should they do to get really into that spot actively?
Well, to tee it up for success, I think first of all, well, clearly the inflection point there is safety and reasonable signals of efficacy, and that's the inflection point. Now, and then if you're thinking about, well, how do I get the best deal from a fiduciary perspective? That means that you really have to understand that you have to have a really good valuation of what the asset is and what the company is. And this is where I think there's a big disconnect because if you leave it up to especially scientific founders, I think they grossly underestimate the value of the asset in the company. And I have a very good friend that does this for a living. In fact, I think he was presenting to JP Morgan today, their bankers, on his valuation model. And I was talking to him this last weekend, and he said, he started working with the company, and their valuation was about three billion. And by the time he got done with his valuation model, it was more like 20 billion.
Mm.
So understanding that true valuation is going to set you up for really good negotiations and to get the best values you can for the company that you have.
How do you, what's your secret? How would you approach negotiating valuations with the counterparty? I mean, the models are great and I love them,
Yeah.
but you can just fiddle around with a few variables
Oh,
and
I know.
you come from 3 billion to 20 billion or to nothing at all or 100 billion. When we look at the human process sitting across each other on a negotiation table, how would you tackle the problem of agreeing on a good valuation for both sides?
Well, in a perfect world, you have more than one company that you're negotiating with, or you've had a sequence of companies that you negotiated with. And that kind of surfaces a lot of the issues and really good discussion. Um, yeah, it's an art. Uh, I think at the end of the day, it is sharing data, the thinking behind the models, the to rationalize the models. It's kind of like forecasting, even within a company. And then, just coming to consensus, the ability to be a good negotiator, being willing to listen, to state your point, to know when to draw the line, and then and to know how to work collaboratively together. I don't have a really good answer for that one, Christian. And if you do, let me know, please.
It's a complex process. I mean, I think when I look on the market, negotiating valuations in 2018 at the peak market is completely different than negotiating valuation in back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Mm,
Just think back to these companies. You have your back against the wall. You can't deny. I mean, you have to open the books when a VC comes in, and valuation is always a topic.
yeah.
And they quickly see you have a cash reach of 6 months, and they just need to do nothing at all, and
Yeah.
they get a good deal delivered in 6 months' time. How do you navigate that?
Well, that is a really challenging problem. Because their tactic is delay and let you run out of cash. I get that. Hopefully, we're not in that situation. And if we're really good CEOs at what we do, we've been able to raise enough cash so that when they open up the books, you have at least 18 months on hand so
Mm.
that it at least looks viable, if you will, to get to the next inflection point. But that being said, it's tough. If you're down to 2 months cash on hand and you're gonna have to do a riff or close things down, then yeah, you're gonna have to accept a much lower price.
Yeah, but I also
It's
think
the
it's
reality.
a good negotiation point is reminding them of dynamic because at the end of the day, you don't need to raise funds. You can always fiddle around that you really just let the company sit. And at the end of the day, you have an IP that loses value. So if you find a VC who was really interested in the asset, um, they need a team. Rebuilding a team is really tough. This is one, when the team is gone, the asset is nice, but putting a team together, recreating dynamic, this is really hard work. And if a
I
VC
agree.
risks losing that dynamic, they lose a lot of value at the end of the day. So they might get a good deal from a desperate team, but
Yeah,
will they have a fast move towards the next value inflection point? I doubt it. I doubt it. So finding
that's
a
a
balance
great
there.
point. Yeah, there's so much institutional knowledge that's embedded in each of those individuals that
Mm,
it's not like you can write it all down and then give them a report. That's just going to be the surface of the information and the challenges and all the stuff. So that's a great point. And I'll have to make note of that one.
yeah. When we look at your company and everything goes like you want it, and we are in 2030, how does the company look like?
It looks like Amgen in 2002, or no, it looks like Amgen in let's see, the 95, 93, 94, 95, early 90s. And then, or it would look like Gilead in the mid 2000s, I think, where there's a drug on the market. We've got a successful and growing company. We have a passionate leadership team that is really focused on doing the right thing. And we're recognized as a great place to work. And I think if that would be the ultimate win for Sarcomatrix.
You will make it to the market in 5 years. Everything just goes according to plan. It's 5 years to market for your drug.
Yes. If it goes to plan,
Wow.
5 years to market. Yeah. With an accelerated approval. And then it would require a follow-on phase for safety, continuous monitoring, and then a confirmatory study in the future. But what that does is it gets the drug on the market to these patients that absolutely need it here today. And then it's a step forward to full approval.
So you have 1 year to the first efficacy readouts,
Yep.
then probably another 2 years for a larger scale study.
Yep.
And then you jump directly into the approval process.
Mhm.
Probably also negotiating with a pharma partner in parallel, a license deal so that
Yes,
you can take the last mile. And in 2030, you are well positioned to develop your company in all kinds of directions.
correct. That's the strategy.
Yeah, yeah.
Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's the perfect
Okay.
VC. It's the perfect VC plan. They just need to have money to invest. I think you really tell the story in a way that's very solid and sound for VCs and tackles all the checkboxes. Your experience shines through.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I think you're being overly generous in that observation, but I appreciate that.
When you look at the VC environment, what is the change that you would like to see in the next 5 years while you develop a company?
Well, I'd like to see them shift more back to first in class novel drugs. Listen, I get why, with a proven target and a drug on the market, that you'll develop a second, third, fourth product for that market. I get that. Much lower risk, um, and likelihood of success much higher. But I think the real wins are novel first-in-class drugs that really open up the market. I mean, if you look at Novo Nordisk going back to the Wyeth
Mm.
days and their GLP-1s, if you have time, you should really look into it. It's an incredible story about persistence because there was one scientist there at Wyeth back in the day that actually, I think, took some of the samples and everything and put them, if I'm not mistaken, wrapped them in tinfoil and put them in his freezer at home. And then after Novo Nordisk, the acquisitions go, and then they start the program back up. This person had persisted for 10 years, if not more, to drive that product forward. And look at the success of GLP-1s now today. So, first to market is a challenge. It's a huge challenge, but I think that the payoff is huge. So, invest a little bit of money and bet for the big payoff, and then balance your portfolio with more risk-adjusted assets. I'd like to see a little bit more of that, frankly.
I totally agree. GLP-1 is an interesting story. The most amazing fact that I learned with the Novo Nordisk success is that it was not only a development in the last 10 years. I think the history
Yeah,
dates back to the somewhere mid 80s, early 80s,
yeah,
and it was dropped a few times by big pharma because they said there's no market, it doesn't work,
yeah.
we can't find the right formulation. But a few scientists just kept the story going.
They did. It's incredible. You should really dig into that one. That'd be a great case study.
It's
There may be a book, or I vaguely remember reading something about it, but it is an incredible story. The other thing I would add, Christian, is I think it takes about 20 years to evolve basic science to the point where there's opportunity to develop a drug. So if you go back and look at technology that has evolved 20 years, that's sitting on a bench somewhere at some university, it's very likely that has evolved to the point where you can identify a target and you can identify a drug. So don't forget that these labs it takes time. Um, the expertise that they build up over decades is critically important,
Mm.
and their ability to isolate targets is just incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think also for the founders, it's important to understand that when they embark on a journey of developing a company, it's not an 18-month journey or a 24-month journey. They're likely working on that idea 5 to 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a long-term commitment, and you
Yeah.
really have to want it. Yeah, it's not it's not the next website or some of the the other thing I would add is I think I struggle with a lot of VCs are looking at a 3 to 5 year time horizon, and I get that you need to return to your LPs, a return, et cetera. But if you're looking at biotech and where we're at right now, it's a 7, 10 year um, commitment. But if you can break it down to milestones and inflection points and when data is released, I think there's a very rational way to say, and that's the perfect world in my mind is a commitment from a VC for the long haul that understands that we'll dial it back to a minimal investment today that brings us to this point, and then success based on that will grow from there. But I'm in it with you for the long haul is just the absolute perfect way to evolve Sarcomatrix at this time.
This is one of the most interesting points in this intersection of venture capital and biotech. I think what you mentioned, the playbook of VC funds is always the same, 10-year funds time. They need to invest the funds in 24 months, then have an
Yeah,
observation period of 3 to 5 years, and at year seven, they need to start thinking of divestment because they made a promise to their LPs that latest after 10 years, with 2 years grace period, they need to return everything to them.
yeah, yeah.
And then you have all these stories of great companies that took 10, 15, 20 years to mature and develop to their full valuation. Uh, How would you resolve that if you could change it?
Wow, I'm not sure we can. I guess with the exception of, presenting some case studies in biotech where that was true, I guess with the right VC that would resonate.
Mm,
Listen, I understand being a general partner and running these funds it's hard. It is really hard, and
it is.
expectations are set, and they do need return money in a real way. Um, I don't know. In today's world, it seems to me like we're compressing timelines continuously, and under the assumption that with new AI tools or some breakthrough in doing clinical studies is going to radically accelerate development. And I'm not there yet. I just don't think that things are going to happen nearly as fast as we could, and especially in the clinical trial recruiting and doing clinical trial phase. It's just that takes time and a lot of effort to get that done, and it tends to be um, overlooked, I think, from time to
Mm.
time.
Yeah, I think one thing that we often forget is in investment, VC investments, the LPs invest because they want to make money at the end of the day. And if we want more venture capital in an industry, we need to support the VCs and helping them make more money. Otherwise, the LPs won't invest again.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
We are in the final minutes of our conversation, and I would like to tap a little bit at the end in your know-how about Amgen, Gilead, and also the Genentech playbook. You really are one of the people that understand the industry like no other from the commercial point of view and have experienced all phases. And when I look at the playbook back in the 80s and 90s, it was pretty much de-risk your asset, get VC fund, make an IPO, license with pharma, partner with pharma.
Hmm. Yeah.
When biotech founders now start their companies in 2025, do you think this playbook is still valid in 2025, or are we heading towards a different one?
Yeah, I do. I definitely think that it is the right playbook. I think I look back at the, decades. What's really changed in my mind is the the significant number of service providers that you can leverage CROs, CDMOs, specific research, consultant stat. There's just uh, there's just a tremendous amount of resources that you can pull together. So I think it's much easier now to have a virtual company to really keep your burn rate really low early on, and to get a lot of really good work done, and then being very thoughtful about at what point does it make sense to bring that that workload in-house and build the expertise in-house. That's very much delayed in my mind. So it just seems to me like the ability to spend less early on is much greater, and that you can be more thoughtful about, really bringing on employees and assets that are going to burden the company for the long term. So much more flexible. That's the one thing that I see.
So it's still the Kleiner Perkins playbook that they started with Genentech. Instead of building facilities and throwing millions into a company, you build your company virtually, put most of the people on an advisory role, run the experiments in labs that basically work from project to project to de-risk
Mhm.
your main assets, and then just build it from there the minute you get license fees. So it's still the
Yeah,
playbook for the next 10 years.
I think so. I don't, well, I'll keep I'll keep an open mind, but I think the fundamentals are still the fundamentals there.
Yeah,
The,
yeah.
the other thing I would add is I look back at Amgen in the early days and Gilead in the early days, and this is how frugal they were. Mike Reardon, who started Gilead Sciences, his desk in his office was two file cabinets and an old door.
Really?
Okay. These facilities, if you do it right, are not fancy.
Mhm.
They're very functional and very very basic, if you will, but they get the job done. And that's where when I walk into some of these startups and they're downtown San Francisco and they've got the really nice offices with foosball tables and ping pong and all that other stuff, I run. I just think that is the focus is wrong. They haven't figured it out, and they need to just get back to basics and do the basics really, really well.
I couldn't agree more. I like the story from Gilead. I didn't know that they had a desk from made out of a door.
An old door. Yeah.
Really? This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
funny.
Well, the
And
other thing that people don't know about early days of Amgen is that George Rathman had a go-to guy that
mm,
believed in him so much that whenever he needed like another $50 million, he could pick up the phone and get another $50 million. So I,
really.
I really would love to have that person working with us right now, but I highly doubt that they're there.
Yeah, the money is there. We just need to make them invest, especially in California. I mean, California is when I look at California in the last 15 years, it just took off while Europe, in my opinion, it was a gradual decline from 2010 up to 2025, and we made investing so unattractive here in Europe that many of CRISPR Therapeutics, for example, I think the founders are from Austria, Switzerland, but they went to the Nasdaq at the end of the day because the capital market works there. How do you view the Californian ecosystem in 2025?
Um, well, I think in the last couple of years, the Cambridge system on the East Coast is probably more evolving and active than the California system. Um, one challenge living at Lake Tahoe where I live, where I'm not in the Bay Area on a regular basis, it is a little harder to meet people face to face, and I think that's
Mm.
critically important, especially when you're raising money. But that being said, the state of Nevada is not sophisticated about biotech investing, so there's just not the funds here. So you do have to go to California. And the other thing I would say that when I look at the different ecosystems, whether it's San Diego, Seattle, California, Cambridge, in San Francisco and Cambridge, it's embedded in the researcher's mind that our objective is to evolve products to the marketplace. And I think at a lot of other places, they're just too busy raising grant money to fund their labs to get the research done, and they don't pick up and really think about how do we move it to the marketplace. As an example, University of Nevada, Reno, the transfer group there analyzed and determined that there was $200 million in NIH grant funding over the last 10 years. And there's this great scientist sitting on the bench, but they don't make their license fees unless you get something to the market. So actually, when I showed up, they were very appreciative because I was the first biotech executive to show up in that market.
Mhm.
And in fact, Grace Chow, who was running the group, said, "Thank God you showed up," is what she said when I showed up. And it's been great because you get a lot of support from the licensing group. There's a lot of enthusiasm in the university setting. And even in Nevada, where I live right now, we've got support from the governor to match funds 1 to 1 for the first million in for our first pre-seed seed series A, B, and C, because they want to create a little biotech hub. And they understand that the drug on the market will return potentially hundreds of millions of dollars of license fees back to the university, which then becomes the catalyst for significant research and growth. So
Yeah, that's the great upside. This market understanding, is this really so rare in people also in the United States? You said that, or I understood that you said in California it's a given, but
it's a
outside
given in
California,
California.
but
Mhm.
outside it's more research oriented and less market oriented.
Well, there's pockets, and I think it varies, but in general, yeah. Um, Outside of California and Cambridge, oh, and I'm sure Chicago's got some really good science there too, but it's not baked into the DNA of the researchers there.
Mhm.
So you have to educate them. As an example, we were doing initial stock allocation for the startup of the company. And when you would ask, and I find this true no matter what research team I talk to, you ask them what of from research to commercialization, what percent of value are you adding as a research group? And they'll usually say something like, well, 80%. But the reality is that it's about, 20, 25%. So that's some of the challenges that you're going to run into in some of the other markets is there's just not a basic understanding of how everything works. But take the time, educate them, grow, and we'll go from there.
David, it's really great talking to you, and time flies when you have fun. We are in the last 4 minutes of our conversation. Is there anything open at the end that you would like to address?
Um, I just like to say that I think we got something really special here at Sarcomatrix, and I've got connections through my actually 4 decades of experience in biotech, so that I've got really good individuals that are working for equity. So our burn rate is almost nothing. Our research is paid for, and it's really ripe for an investment. And I understand it's a really challenging investment environment. But I also know that there's the right individual or VC or family member out there that is willing to take a chance on our company. And I truly believe in my heart of heart that it's going to be a huge win for whoever steps up and takes that risk. So, Tristan, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking time to meet with me and learn a little bit more about Saccharomatics.
David, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation and to learn more about your company, and especially diving into first-hand stories from the great companies, Gilead, Amgen, acquisitions, the current fundraising situation, what you built with your team. Sarcometric sounds like a great market, a great team, and a great opportunity. And if you don't mind, I will use the episode, pass it around in my network, and maybe one or the other reacts to it or responds to it and thinks you have the right team and the right experience to move drugs forward. Small molecules, I know some in Europe are interested in that space, but what they lack is market expertise and how to move a small molecule to the market. So there might be some overlap.
Excellent. I would really appreciate that, and that would be tremendous as we establish this company.
Let's do so. David, thank you very much for your time and have a great day in Nevada.
You too. Have a great day in Vienna. I look I
See,
look forward to meeting you in person in the future.
let's do so. Let's do so. Have a great, see you. See you.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.
Bye bye.